We've always looked up and seen the sun as, the ultimate source of power in our solar system. But what if our star isn't really a solo act? What if its powerful rhythmic pulse of energy is actually being conducted by a much, much larger cosmic orchestra? So today, we're diving into a fascinating and, I gotta say, highly unconventional theory about what's really driving our sun's behavior. We're going to be looking at some work from someone who claims they've actually deciphered the solar cycles.
All right, here's the game plan. First, we'll tackle the central mystery of the sun itself. Then, we'll introduce this pretty radical new theory about its engine. We're going to explore how planetary alignment supposedly works, see how it is applied to our current solar cycle 25, and then, at the end, talk about why any of this really matters.
Okay, let's start with the big problem, the one that's been stumping astronomers for centuries. The sun's just, well, it's incredibly unpredictable.
I mean, we've known since Galileo's time that the sun has this kind of heartbeat, a cycle of sunspots and solar flares that just ebbs and flows over time, giving us periods of solar maximum and solar minimum.
On average, this cycle lasts about 11 years. But that's the key word, right? Average. It can be as short as 9 years or as long as 14, and it's that variability that makes it so difficult to forecast.
And for all our technology, mainstream science has had a really tough time getting these predictions right. The big theories have always looked inward, They assume the answer is hidden in all those complex convection currents and magnetic forces deep inside the sun. But the truth is, those models have consistently come up short.
And that brings us to a completely different way of looking at it. What if the clock that's controlling the sun isn't inside it at all? What if it's actually external?
So this is the fundamental difference. The mainstream view says the engine is internal, but the theory we're digging into today argues the exact opposite, that the solar cycle is actually caused by an external charged feedback loop between the sun and its biggest planets.
Now, this isn't about some kind of mystical force. It's proposing a physical mechanism. It all centers on what the author calls a charge field, a force they say is carried by photons, which creates this powerful electromagnetic circuit all through the solar system. So think of it less like astrology and more like a gigantic celestial electrical system.
And in this cosmic circuit, the main players are the big ones. We're talking about the 4 gas and ice giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. According to this theory, their huge scale and powerful fields are what actually drive the entire system.
So how in the world could planets that are so far away possibly control a star? Well, the answer, according to this source, all comes down to their alignment.
Okay, here's the process in 4 steps. First, the sun isn't the ultimate source. It's pulling in charge from the galactic core. Second, it sends that charge back out. Third, the big Jovian planets, they absorb, recycle, and then send that charge back to the sun. And fourth, and this is the critical part, the way these planets line up either stacks that returning charge and amplifies it, or it causes interference and dampens the effect.
So when the planets line up, either together on the same side of the sun, that's a conjunction, or on opposite sides, an opposition, they basically create this powerful, combined line of charge aimed right at the sun. But when they're at 90-degree angles to each other, their influence is way smaller. It's really all about geometric amplification.
And there's one more layer to this. The real supercharger isn't just planets lining up with the sun. It's when that entire planetary line also aligns with the main axis of charge coming into our solar system from the galactic core. That's when you get the really massive solar events.
So, that's the theory. But, a theory is only as good as its predictions, and that brings us to the pretty dramatic story of our current cycle, solar cycle 25.
Look at this. On the left, you've got the official 2019 prediction. It's a broad, kind of vague guess that cycle 25 would be pretty weak. But on the right, this is the theory's prediction from 2020, a hand-drawn, month-by-month forecast of specific peaks and valleys, all tied to planetary movements. I mean, it was an incredibly bold, almost reckless claim to make.
And here's how it apparently played out. The theory predicted a spike around the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in late 2020. And it happened. It predicted another one for the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in April 2022, and then again for Jupiter-Uranus in April of 2024. According to the source, these alignments lined up perfectly with major spikes in solar activity, just like that hand-drawn graph said they would. And the next big test? That's coming up with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in early 2026.
Now, this is where the story takes a really wild turn. According to the theory's author, these successful predictions caused a huge stir.
And he makes this extraordinary claim that the U.S. Air Force was brought in to take over sunspot reporting, alleging that the official data was then manipulated just to hide the accuracy of his forecasts.
The author uses a pretty powerful metaphor to describe how he sees the reaction. He says the scientific mainstream is basically acting like the Black Knight from Monty Python, just refusing to acknowledge the evidence even as it piles up.
So all this brings us to our final and honestly the most important section. Beyond all the scientific debate, why does cracking the code of the solar cycle matter so much to us here on Earth?
Because if this theory is even close to right, then the sun's charge cycle is the main driver of practically everything on our planet. I'm not just talking about sunlight and heat. I mean weather patterns, volcanic eruptions, seismic activity. It's all a downstream effect of this massive cosmic engine.
And think about it. If we can predict the sun, we can potentially predict its effects here. I mean, imagine being able to accurately forecast major droughts or floods or even hurricane seasons years in advance. Imagine anticipating periods of major earthquakes and volcanic activity. The implications for everything. Agriculture, disaster prep, the global economy, they're just staggering.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. The source material we looked at today makes a really bold claim that it's found a key to prediction, but it also tells a story of resistance. And that raises a pretty profound question, not just about science, but about all of us. If a theory really could predict the future, how would we ever know if we were truly ready to listen?